I've been having a lot of experiences with that recently. I think it is a very important thing to notice our discomfort with kind of being still and being quiet. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with the suspicion that it's not enough. I mean, for a while, my mantra was maybe everything's okay right now. Maybe everything's okay. Like I'm so trained to worry. It's like, is everything okay? What's going to happen next? And what am I? It's like maybe actually everything's fine. And at least you're right in this. Now, of course, I'm going to have challenges and things that I have to address, and everybody does. But in that moment where those thoughts are streaming through my mind, maybe I could just pause and say, actually, I'm okay. I'm okay right now.
Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. You're listening to episode 169 of the Sober Edge podcast. Welcome. I'm delighted to introduce you to today's guest, Billy Wynne. And Billy Wynne is an author, and he is a Buddhist and a Zen meditation teacher and a coach. And you may recognize his last name because I've had his wife, Christy, on the podcast twice. And Christy is a fellow This Naked Mind Institute coach. She's been a friend and mentor. And her and Billy were the co-owners of Awake in Denver, one of the very first sober bars in the United States. They opened Awake in 2020, and I was so lucky to get to visit this establishment just as the doors were closing in August of 2022. So it was wonderful to have this conversation with Billy and find out what he's been up to. And I really am excited for you to learn more about his presence coaching, his philosophy that involves Buddhism and Zen meditation, and to anticipate his upcoming book, The Empty Path. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hey, everyone, it's Terry back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast. And I have sitting in my Zoom room with me, Mr. Billy Wynne. And you may recognize that name because I have interviewed his wife twice on this podcast. In fact, Billy, she was my very first guest when I started the Sober Edge podcast in 2021.
She told me that. Yeah, she's proud to be the OG guest. I think it was a great experience.
Yeah, and Billy and I have been catching up briefly because I wanted to save most of this conversation for the recording. So, a little bit about what I understand of your journey. I'm going to share what I know, and then you're going to poke holes in it and tell me what's true.
Okay.
So what I know from getting to know Christy, who is also a fellow This Naked Mind coach and someone that I went through training with, is that your family was in Europe during the beginning or maybe all of COVID. And that was where you really first kind of started to explore this relationship with alcohol and whether or not there was enough offerings here in the United States. And the other connection we have, Billy, as I'm telling this story, and it might be a story, is that I've been to Awake right before it closed. In fact, I think it was already closed, but the space was still there. And, that also is a place of connection because I was born in Colorado, in Denver. So I have fond, association. And just knowing that you took this nucleus of an idea and created something really special. So will you tell us a little bit about, I've heard Christy's version, but how did it happen for you? The not drinking, the journey into Awake and awakening, dare I say.
Sure. Well, thank you very much again for having me. And so it was 2018 that we moved to France. It was pre-COVID, and it was a magical experience. We were there for one school year. Our kids were in school there, and it was helpful to have that kind of pause, that slowdown in life. I think that did contribute to my realization that alcohol, was an issue for me that I needed to get, kind of get a handle on. It was a typical journey, I think, in the sense that, I was a lifelong drinker, a hard drinker. I, had many, many experiences that I regretted from drinking alcohol, but nothing quite, drove me to quit until we were there in that fall of 2018 and early 2019. Christy read *This Naked Mind* and shared that with me, and I was watching her journey. She wrote an article for a newspaper in our old neighborhood in Denver, and I helped edit that to some degree. And it really, that process kind of brought me into some of the science around alcohol, and really, I absorbed it in a way that I had not before. Another thing that was going on at that time is I'm a Zen Buddhist, and I had been a member of the Zen Center for a number of years, but I was taking Jakai, which is sort of loosely translated as lay ordination in the Buddhist tradition. And during that process, one adopts what they call the Bodhisattva precepts. And without going into a tremendous detail about it, one of them says, I vow not to misuse alcohol or drugs that cloud the mind. And so there's not a clear sort of dictate about what, the Zen student has to do about that. But for me, after some, careful observation, it was clear that it was time for me to stop drinking alcohol. And specifically what happened was so Christy had quit about a month prior in December 2018, excuse me. And so in January 2019, I had flown to DC, as I did a couple times that year, for my health policy consulting business, and went out to dinner with my team of, I think 5 or 6 folks were there, and had kind of a standard evening of maybe 1 or 2 drinks, before the meal, a couple of drinks, so, a couple glasses of wine, maybe. So a healthy chunk of alcohol, but not, I was not like sort of really tipsy or anything like that. I woke up the next morning and I felt like trash. And I picked up my phone and I texted Christy, and I was like, I didn't quit right away. I did also another thing that I think other people do is I set some rules. I was like, okay, I'm not going to drink alone. I'm, only going to drink 1 drink on the weekdays. So I don't know. It was like 3 different rules that I texted her, as part of a way to kind of bind myself to abide by that. So I got back to France, and partially because Christy wasn't drinking, and that, we were relatively introverted at that time, and still to this day, to some degree, we are introverts. But, if I'm not drinking alone, then I wasn't drinking at all. And so a couple of weeks went by, and it just sort of dawned on me that I was done, and I felt better. I immediately started losing weight. I was happier. I was clearer, simply not having that drag, not even a full blown hangover, but that just, embedded weariness that one has when they're consistently drinking alcohol. Leaving that behind was a really noticeable difference. And I really have not looked back. It was, I'm very fortunate and grateful that, I think it was relatively easy for me. It was really a choice to stop drinking alcohol. Another big part of it, and to get to your kind of the story of Awake, was I think another reason that I was able to quit was that I didn't look at it as leaving something behind or letting something go. I looked at it as gaining a new life, a new way of being in the world that was without alcohol. And that was super exciting, for me. And it also, because of this alcohol-free movement that was happening with a new wave of products and culture and groups and ways of doing it, and Sober Curious and the whole thing that was just sort of starting to boom at that time, it also felt kind of cool. It felt culturally relevant to quit drinking alcohol and participate in that movement. And so that was also a big factor in my ability to quit. So we were watching all this unfold. We were hearing about Sans Bar in Austin and some of the, forerunners of alcohol-free bars in the US and around the world. And so not long after we got back to the US, I started to daydream about the idea of opening an alcohol-free bar. And literally, I had no experience. And this came out in this part of the Awake story. In the restaurant bar, I never waited tables. Nothing, So I was literally Googling, what's a budget for a bar? What's, all that kind of stuff. Of course, I talked to some friends, and we do have some friends who have open restaurants and so forth. But I started collecting information. And yeah, I won't tell you the whole life story, but that led to opening Awake first coffee out of the door during COVID in November of 2020. And then when the Denver COVID restrictions were lifted, the bar opened in May of 21. And it had about an 18-month, almost 2-year lifespan before it was time to close.
Yeah, well, and it was such a cool experience to feel like slightly connected to this journey that you and Christy were on because, this naked mind was like tracking it all. All of us coaches were like, what's Christy doing? Oh my gosh, they're going to do this thing. And I remember seeing the first pictures that she shared when you guys were serving coffee out the window. And then, I think I visited in August of 2022.
Yeah.
And so I think you guys had just closed the doors. And it was such a bittersweet moment because it was such a cool offering. And yet I was excited to see what Billy and Christy were going to do next. And I think that also is just a beautiful part of your story because of the willingness to explore and then move on from that. Like you said, it came to a natural sort of end. I do notice, though, that in your website, you have the same logo that I have an Awake t-shirt. It's going to be vintage here soon.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's a collector's item.
Yeah. So how did so I'm curious about two things because I guess I've always been sort of fascinated by Buddhism and thinking, is it too late for me to become a Buddhist? But, how that has informed your, just your exploration into what you're doing now with meditation and I think maybe men's retreats and writing a book and how that has informed this, as well as where you see the connection between what unfolds when alcohol is out of the way.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So, my Buddhism, my Zen Buddhism, really informs everything that I do, and I believe makes me a better father and husband, and person. I guess I was initially piqued, kind of maybe like a lot of people, high school, college, encountered a few different writings, read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, and took some courses on Buddhism in college. And so always had this kind of felt a connection to that tradition, but didn't really fully explore it until it was about maybe 9 years ago. At first, I got into mindfulness meditation. It really started with a prescription from a cardiologist in my late 20s. He gave me the relaxation response, which is a very early, clinically oriented introduction to meditation. And so was dabbling, kind of it didn't really become a habit. And then I read Mindfulness in Plain English, which is another excellent introduction to meditation. And with that, I started to make it more of a integrated part of my life. And I decided, for a variety of reasons, I was raised Christian, and Christy and I were married in a Unitarian church in Charlottesville, and I still sort of have a lot of affinity for that tradition as well. But I was looking around for places in Denver, the communities to practice Buddhism, and I went to a few of the different ones, and then in 2016, I walked into the Zen Center of Denver. And didn't really, we all heard the word Zen, right? We all probably have a lot of ideas about what that means. I really didn't know what it meant in reality until I got there. And in fact, quite different, I think, than a lot of the popular impression of that term and practice are. But for me, it was home immediately. That first, 1 hour on a Friday morning before Labor Day in 2016, I was like, this is what I've been looking for. So that, and specifically the practice of meditation, which is Zen means meditation, which is so central to it, undoubtedly allowed me to look at my life in a new way. And one thing that I realized one thing that I realized in the fall of 2019 is the worst thing going on in my life was alcohol. So that was just as an aside, that was a huge eye-opening experience. But also the way that meditation and mindfulness and Zen kind of slow down or distill your experience of life, things like that, the fact that alcohol is the worst thing in my life, become clearer, right? And more kind of readily apparent and easily accessed. And so that was true throughout my experience of Awake, both the planning and the opening and the launching and all of the excitement around that. And then eventually the recognition that it was not really serving me. And I felt that if it wasn't serving me to be, a peaceful and mindful and happy person, then it wasn't ultimately going to bear fruit, for the world in the long run. And also it was, it was losing money. And there are practical considerations as well. But the combination of those things, I think, as you mentioned, allowed me to walk away from it maybe sooner than one otherwise might, and to just sort of say this was an amazing experience. I was very fortunate to have a lot of encouragement and appreciation from the community, both the alcohol-free community and many other people in the community, that I felt like it was, time and energy and money well spent to have had that adventure and then be able to move into the next phase, which, as you noted and symbolized by the maintenance of the logo, for me, it's all connected. It's all part of the same journey, in and out of awake and onward to teaching meditation and writing my book and so forth. So,
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I always get so inspired by these types of stories, because I think what's so beautiful is that this realization of, like we talk about finding your purpose, which I put in quotes, because to me, it's just following your curiosity. I have a funny story about fencing where I'm not going to be an Olympic fencer, Billy, just in case you were wondering.
sorry.
And
Yeah.
so, it's interesting to just recognize, like, there's so many beautiful opportunities, but sometimes we're so stuck. And I was just talking with a client recently, and, we talked about this idea of holding on to something so tight. And when we have that sense of release and that openness, like the energetic flow, and to me, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is what you find in Buddhism and, Zen practices, is that ability to be at peace and recognize when you're not at peace and use that information to find that direction.
Yeah. There is a lot, I think, to be said for, one term for it is equanimity, just sort of seeing things as they are, appreciating them for what they are. And yes, it's not, I think it's important to clarify, both in terms of mindfulness and Buddhism and Zen. It's like, there's nothing, wrong with going on a vacation, or, doing something you think is fun, or having a great meal, or, all these kinds of things are wonderful. It's not that they're not fun and happy. It's that we appreciate them for what they are, rather than all of the kind of expectation that we tend to add into them, right? And all of the evaluation we might be doing while they're going on, and all of the kind of retrospective analysis that might typically happen after they're over. All of that stuff is just extra, to the experience itself. And so, yes, it is. It really creates a different kind of joy when you can go through experiences, and including sad experience. Life is also sad, and life also has tragedy, and life has hardship, and life has frustration. And so, on that side of the coin as well, and all of the attachment that typically goes along with all of those types of experiences as well, to simply be with them as they are is really life changing. What I like to say is that the actual sort of, someone, looking at your life from the outside in wouldn't necessarily see a whole lot of difference, right? You're still going to your job, you're still, working on your relationships, you're still, everything's still happening kind of like it was before, but your internal experience of those things is different. And I do believe that makes a difference in how do you respond to these situations as they arise. And at the very least, we're able to better see and understand them, and perhaps learn from them as we grow and evolve.
I feel like you described my experience with moving alcohol out of my life. That's a place where I started to see, like, I feel like it's so funny because I tell people, like, my life, it looks completely different, but not really, because I have the same friends, I have the same husband, I live in the same town, I do different work as you do, but it's really fascinating to realize how different I show up in the world. And I was just laughing as you were talking, because you said the book that you read was Mindfulness in Plain English. I read Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics, which sounds like a very different entry place to meditation.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different entry places now, which is great. The core practice is very similar, but the way that it's communicated to people and the way that it kind of taps into, what people are looking for is very varied now. And I think that's great.
Yeah. So you tell us what you're doing now. So you have a meditation teaching practice. And are you still offering retreats for men, or is that occasionally part of what you do? Or is that something you tried once or twice and have moved on from?
So I have not done retreats for men. I have done coaching. It's open to.
Yeah, I'm making up stories,
That's
Billy.
all
It's a
right.
good thing you're
Someday,
here.
I mean, I'd love to do a retreat for men, and I have been thinking if this book goes all right, I might. That's definitely one of the book ideas I have in the future is to address, manhood, which is a just fraught topic, but we can get to that another time. So I do teach meditation. I'm teaching a class at the Zen Center of Denver, which it's a mindfulness class, taking place at the Zen Center. So it's not a Buddhist class. That's in January, Wednesday nights. And so that's really mindfulness 101. And it's going to be very heavy on practice and a little bit of kind of theory and instruction, but really just going to give people an opportunity to practice and ask questions and, talk about their experience with that. So I do that periodically at the Zen Center. I do it every now and then elsewhere, around town and that kind of thing. And then I do write, like I've been writing a series of articles for recovery.com, which is, again, kind of a mindfulness and plain what is mindfulness meditation and why would one do mindfulness meditation, all the clinical, not all of it, but a snapshot really of all the clinical evidence that is out there supporting the practice of mindfulness and its impact on cognition and mental health and addiction and so forth. So I write about it and I teach the classes periodically, and then I also integrate when I do in coaching. It's called presence-based coaching, but it really integrates the mindfulness principles and tend to engage with my clients on people. The people that come to me are typically interested in that as well, and so we work that into our kind of program so that there's like for instance, centering exercise at the beginning of the meeting, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have a couple questions, but you made me think of something new. What is presence-based coaching versus other types of coaching?
Sure. So presence-based coaching it's a program. It's Asheville, North Carolina is where it's based. Certified by the International Coaching Federation. So in that sense, there's certain sort of skills and metrics that are used to qualify someone to be a coach. And so it has all of those things, but it leans in on mindfulness and it leans in on somatic awareness. And so a lot of times what we'll do is, we're exploring a certain scenario in someone's, let's say, work life, and we're trying to figure out what it is they actually want, which is one of the first steps and is often not as readily apparent as we might think. And it's like, okay, well, try on this outcome for size, and let me know how it feels, and then, okay, shake that loose. Now kind of, maybe turn your chair in the opposite direction, try on the other outcome, and then let me know how that feels. And so that type of thing is, relatively unique, or at least emphasized by presence-based coaching. A lot of the same sort of format and standards that apply to coaches internationally are also there.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I think it's such a cool way to look at things. So one of the mentors that I have is Brooke Castillo, who runs the Life Coach School. And she talks about, like, when you were saying life is still hard or sad, or we still have hard things, she says life is 50-50. And I love that because it just helps us be in the reality of day to day. Like, we're not always high, we're not always low. But, the idea, one of the other things she says is, she has a decision-making process that I find fascinating. And I wonder if some of this has to do with sort of presence-based coaching. But she looks at, what if both outcomes were amazing? Then what would you choose?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have that natural cognitive bias.
Yeah.
That we like, well, that would be a better choice because it means XYZ, or that would be the best choice. And so we don't even recognize that we are, in fact, turning our chair in one direction on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're making a pros and cons list, but what we're really doing is we're bringing in our natural bias. And so, yeah, I love the idea of just allowing, like, how does it feel if both things were amazing? Like, what would you choose?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's, there's a fine line between intuition and knowing and trusting your body and being biased, right? And falling into habit patterns. And so that's one area where a coach could actually be helpful, because a good coach can see the difference, in the person as they are ruminating on, different scenarios and different whatever action plan to address their, their habit patterns. And so that's one area where a coach could actually be helpful, because a good coach can see the difference, in the person as they are ruminating on, different scenarios and different whatever action plan to address their, their habit patterns. And so that's one area where a coach could actually be helpful, because a good coach can see the difference, in the person as they are ruminating on, different scenarios and different whatever action plan to address their, their habit patterns. their challenges or what have you. But it's true, and because also, and this relates a little bit back to Zen, because on the one hand, there is a prioritization of personal firsthand experience, of somatic experience, of intuition, of kind of unplanned, unrehearsed responses to circumstances in Zen. And there's to some degree a skepticism that sort of reading about Buddhism or thinking about Buddhism is gonna get you to the same place as the practice itself. But also there is a high regard for reason, and for things making sense and kind of adding up, in your mind about how you're going to approach something. So, it's a balance. It's a balance of your knowing and your trusting and what your body is telling you, but also not ignoring what your mind is telling you.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And I will just ask you this question because this has been my own personal experience. Like, I feel like for all of my life up till when I stopped drinking, and then even after, in the first few years, it's been 9 years for me, for context. I was just a head walking around attached to a body, like all brain, no somatic awareness, no body, sensation.
Yeah.
So tell our listeners and me as well, like how meditation helps us in that somatic awareness.
Yeah. So same, by the way. And I mean, I'm very, very cerebral, kind of person throughout my life. And yeah, alcohol was another way. You're kind of numb to both ends, numb to the mind and numb to the body. So meditation is particularly helpful because, first of all, one misnomer that people have is that it's about stopping thoughts or, emptying your mind or that type of thing. And that is not the case. Thoughts will continue to arise. The mind secretes thoughts, just like the glands secrete enzymes, Jack Kornfield likes to say. So it's what the brain does, what the mind does, it produces thought. So don't, I think it's setting ourselves up for disappointment if we think it's not about meditating, we're going to stop thinking. What we can do is change our relationship with our thoughts so that there's this extra space between our consciousness, our conscious awareness, our embodied presence, on the mat or wherever we might be meditating, and these thoughts, that we start to see them arise. We're no longer kind of controlled by them or just kind of following them blindly down this cavern. We're now sitting still, centered, and then poof, okay, and now I'm thinking about breakfast, or poof, now I'm remembering this argument I had 3 days ago. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Wow, okay. And then it's like, okay, good, then it just kind of floats on through. And then pretty soon a new thought is gonna come up. So and that experience and that training, stays with us when we get up off of our meditation situation and move into our lives. And that's where we can become, have a little more equanimity and a little bit more awareness of kind of how we're reacting to our circumstances. But so that's it in a nutshell. Again, it's not about stopping thoughts because I certainly have a very, very active mind and imagination. I think a lot of people do too. And if there's anything that I want your listeners to know is that that doesn't mean that meditation is not for you. It doesn't mean that you can't do meditation. It doesn't mean that you're not good at meditation. That's what meditation is. Meditation is sitting there, and at first it's kind of jarring. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't stop planning my workday every time I sit down in the morning. But as with anything else, with practice, again, your relationship to your thoughts and your experience of them begins to shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that allowing that this is an opportunity to explore for anyone, not just someone who is on a spiritual journey or not just someone who is seeking stress relief, but really this beautiful opportunity, kind of like I think about taking a break from alcohol. It's like you don't have to take a break from alcohol because you have a drinking problem. You don't have to take a break from alcohol because your blood pressure is high. You can just take a break from alcohol as a human, having a human experience that could be really cool.
Right. Totally a different way of being with it. And one thing that you reminded me of is there's a kind of one of the original secular kind of work, bodies of work done in meditation was Jon Kabat-Zinn, who did mindfulness-based stress reduction, tested very, very rigorously in lots and lots of different contexts. And so there's lots and lots of evidence. A lot of the data we have about the efficacy of mindfulness, at least recent data, comes from a lot of his work in the different derivations of that. But the one thing that stands out to me the most, and that my Zen teacher, Peggy, who's also an MBSR certified teacher, said during the MBSR class I took from her, that's mindfulness-based stress reduction, is that all you have to do is try. That's what the evidence says. You don't have to be good at it. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to do it, 30 minutes a day. You just have to try to follow the regimen. And the evidence is clear that you will benefit, both in terms of stress reduction and lots of other ways, just from setting aside, the time to follow the regimen as it is. So yes, anyone can do it. And you can do it for any reason, and honestly, the thing that I think I was able to, because there's this hump at the very beginning, I would say, from with anybody getting into it. It's hard, it's unusual. We're not quite sure how to do it. And for me, I think a big reason that I was able to stick with it is that I actually enjoyed the time I was doing it. I enjoyed sitting down. I felt that I was more relaxed, and that was enough. Even if my mind was swimming and I was, felt some pain in my knees and all that kind of stuff, that was worth it to me to come back. Just the simple, pleasant feeling that I would, often get when I set the time aside to meditate.
Yeah, I love that idea of the trying equals benefits, because
Yes.
we often in our culture are so quick to dismiss things as not working or move on to the next thing. Like, oh, I figured that out. Now I'm going to do this other thing, or I tried that. And, slowing down is such a beautiful opportunity for us in this world. And we have to get comfortable with that discomfort of slowing down.
Yes.
I find that so true with many of the clients I work with, that I was having this conversation recently, that we get to a place often, many of us, when we let go of alcohol, where we feel kind of flat or we feel bored.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what if that is actually peace?
Yeah.
And we just don't recognize it because we're so hijacked by dopamine and stress and that immediate gratification. And so I think it's just such a valuable gift to give yourself the opportunity to explore being uncomfortable, even if it's on a meditation mat, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, super interesting, and I've been having a lot of experiences with that recently. I think it is a very important thing to notice our discomfort with kind of being still and being quiet. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with the suspicion that it's not enough. I mean, for a while, my mantra was, maybe everything's okay right now. Maybe everything's okay. Like, I'm so trained to worry. It's like, is everything okay? What's going to happen next? And what am I? It's like, maybe actually everything's fine. And at least you're right in this. Of course, I'm going to have challenges and things that I have to address, and everybody does. But in that moment where those thoughts are streaming through my mind, maybe I could just pause and say, actually, I'm okay. I'm okay right now. And I think that I've been noticing how I try to fill up those blank spaces in time, because there's this fear. I think, this is just speaking for myself. It's a fear that we are actually worthy of this, unbounded joy that is present in every moment, right? We don't think we deserve it. We think there's got to be something wrong with that. So we can't just sit still. We've got to move on to the next thing. And that's kind of a big part of my practice right now. And in Buddhism, to relate it to that, there's lots of different terms for it, but one way we characterize kind of the insight into, joy and happiness and our truest selves is the transmission of the lamp. And there's a collection of stories in Zen Buddhism called the transmission of the lamp. And a teacher gave a talk a couple of months ago at the Zen Center, and she's like, don't deny the lamp. Don't deny the lamp. It's right there for you in that moment. It's okay, right? You could be with it and get used to it. It's not the normal way that we've been trained to live our lives, but it's right there waiting for us. Anyway, yeah, what you said really resonated with me. I think it's an important lesson how we try to avoid, being at peace with the present moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And I was exploring a word that I've been holding on to for a little while. One of the offerings I put out in the world is something called Tea with Terry, where we talk about thoughts, emotions, and actions. And was trying to consider a different way of exploring gratitude or Thanksgiving, and this word savor. And so I'm a foodie at heart. I'm trained as a nutritionist. And so I loved that right off the bat because I was like, yeah, the roots of the word savor or savoring is from tasting and experiencing food and pleasure from food.
Mhm.
But the idea of savor as an action is to slow down and experience the moment and not be so attached to the past or the present, which of course we know, or past and future. We know we want to stay in the presence. And this is part of course, meditation and mindfulness. But, even just for me, kind of meditating on that word savor has been helpful.
Yeah.
And I really have been paying attention to little tiny moments where I can really tune in and say, like, what can I savor right now? Like the laughter at Thanksgiving or being out. We went to a craft fair that was outdoors with my grandson, and he's in a wheelchair. And it was really fun to just see him, wheeling over to this blow up Santa and just pausing. And I think that has been helpful for me. And what we pay attention to, of course, will show up more. And so the idea of slowing down a little bit and allowing ourselves to be in that place of wonder or savoring it's just been a cool experience.
Yeah. Well, that reminds. So next week I'm going on we have our annual, we call it Rohatsu Session retreat at the Zen Center, which is on December 8th. We celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment. So every December we have this retreat, and you just reminded me because it's 10 hours to meditate. It's very intense, and I'm not just describing it for everybody who's listening to this. But it's a very unique experience. Suffice it to say, and it's mainly you're on your mat cushion, almost all day meditating. But every now and then we'll do what we call long kinhin, which is walking meditation. And so I'll, you will kind of circumambulate the building, but then we go outside onto the deck. And on some days, you're feeling the sun on your face for the first time. And just remind you, like, there's nothing more savory. When you've been sitting inside for 6 hours on your mat, dealing with your mind, to go outside and just feel that warmth, right, in your eye, kind of illuminates your field of vision. Something so simple, right, that we experience almost every day. But when things are slowed down and distilled, then it becomes magical, and can really be appreciated.
Yeah, we all need a little more magic. I love that. So Billy, you've written a book that's going to be published in March. Will you tell us about it?
Sure. So it's called The Empty Path, Finding Fulfillment Through the Radical Art of Lessening. And a lot of what we've been talking about is addressed in the book, because it starts with this idea that we need more in order to be happy and fulfilled and at peace. And we've been kind of trained that by society, and we've internalized it, that we have to have more material things, we have to have more experiences, we have to have more relationships, we have to have more wisdom, we have, all the things. It's never quite enough. And again, as I said, in and of themselves, all of those things I think are fine. The problem is that the other side of that coin is that we are not enough, right? We need more because we're trying to fill something that we think is missing. And so what the empty path is about is saying, actually, you are whole and complete from the very beginning. You do not need more in order to be happy. And in fact, buying into this ethos, that we need more to satisfy ourselves, it's causing us to suffer and be unhappy. So there's mindfulness trainings, there's Buddhist wisdom. I tell lots of stories from my own life, including a lot of the story of Awake. I talk about some of the mental health challenges I had as a kid. I talk about my parents' divorce. I mean, there's a lot in there. It's kind of like anybody's first artwork. I feel like we're trying to put, everything into it. But it's really intended to be easy to understand and explain these concepts and practices in a way that are accessible to people, Buddhist, non-Buddhist, meditator, non-meditator. Drinking, not drinking, anybody. I hope, at least, it's written with the intent that there are going to be practices and insights in there that will serve people wherever they might be in their journey.
That's so exciting. And so two thoughts are bubbling up for me. One is this idea of so many of the clients that I work with, like really the root of why they're drinking is this story of not enough.
Yeah.
And I just think that, if we as to use your word, if we distill this down, it really is the human condition, right? It is this place where we are attached to arriving or gaining. And I also think the other thought that comes up often for me is this idea of scarcity and this scarcity mindset. And I think it shows up in our culture around time, money, and one of the big things I find for people is time. Like, and it's not like a sense of time passing. It's like the hustle and grind or the productivity, or I have to accomplish this. I can't sit and read an extra story to my child. And that scarcity mindset, I think, might be at the same root of I am not enough.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, the first chapter of The Empty Path is about time. And it talks about our, unquenchable craving for more time, no matter what we might do. And it invites us to look at time in a different way. And the reality of scarcity that we experience, as I speak to some degree in the book, and this does evolve to some degree from Buddhist thinking, is the idea that we are separate and apart from the rest of the world. That we, kind of have this idea of ourselves as vulnerable in this world where we are separate, and we're always evaluating things as either threatening or beneficial, and we're moving away from the things that we determine to be threatening, and we're chasing after the things that we view to be beneficial. But in that place of separateness, again, nothing will ever satisfy us. And so the empty path is called the empty path because one thing it takes to look at is our own selves and what's really there. And are we so separate from these things around us, and are we so, in need of these things that we crave or threatened by these things that we avoid, including like relationships. And so it's trying to intervene in that mindset that we all share to some degree or another. And say, if we really take and pause, slow things down, tune into things a little more keenly, maybe we're not so separate, right, from those things around us. And then our relationship starts to change, and that scarcity mindset becomes abundance. We have, when we're not separate, we have it all. So that's the case I'm trying to make in the book.
I'm so excited. I wish it was coming out sooner. I know we talked about having this conversation closer to publication, but I also wanted to just introduce you to my audience because I think that having the anticipation of good things is important. So can I ask you a personal question? Because I know your wife and know a little bit of your family. You've got your oldest, she's going off to college, or she has already started?
She was here for Thanksgiving. She's back there now for another 2.5 weeks.
Is she at Cornell?
She is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has that changed your concept of time passing, Billy?
That's very interesting. It is another lesson in the passage of time because Christy and I both, in different ways, but did share the experience of the absence that we felt with our daughter gone, who we, adore and love having around. And so there was a couple weeks of real difficulty of adjusting, not just to her absence, but also, to the change of the pace of time in our household and the pace of things. Our son is in 8th grade, so that continues to drive to some degree, the schedule of the day. But Eleanor, that's my daughter, both in terms of her, the reality of the schedule of her own time, but also just her presence in our house, and as we were going about all the other things that we're doing throughout the day with her here, adjusting to that change was not easy, for us, and was most definitely a change. And now, in the time from her leaving to her coming back, we went out late October for Parents Weekend, and then that felt like a very long time. And now we're in this very small amount of time when, she's gone, and then we'll come back. And so it's like, and I do talk about this in the book. It's like the time stretches based on how you're perceiving it, right? I mean, we've all been to the, you're running through the airport, you don't have enough time, you get to the gate and it's not time to board, and time just stops. You're like, what do I do now? You finally have time maybe to crack your magazine or something in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise had. So Yes, her both the, it's also an experience of kind of space and proximity and physical, experience of our lives and other people, and also of the time, that, you know, is shifting in this new way that we are in our house.
Yeah, I remember when my oldest went off to college, and it's hard to believe she's 40 now. So, it's been a while, but I remember thinking, well, this is crazy. We have children and they like belong to us and they're here. And then we send them off into the world. Like, what kind of crazy madness is this? And then by the time she came home, by summer, she came home that first summer. And the next year was going to come back or something. I'm like, she doesn't live here. Why is she coming? This isn't home. Why is she acting like this is a vacation place? It's fascinating how that shift of perspective really, can happen very quickly.
Yes.
So I want to touch on one other thing before I let you go, Billy. And you and your wife love to travel. I think you mentioned the word adventure, and I think adventure is probably one of your passions. How has that shifted your experience, like seeing more of the world and that perspective? Will you just touch on, between like the experience of maybe showing up as a person not clouded by a substance, and then also your Buddhist background, and then also as a father and a human and a, world traveler? Like, how has that experience shaped where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's been an incredibly powerful influence, and it really started in high school. I was fortunate to go on I took German in high school, an exchange trip for 3 weeks. That was when I got a passport. That was my first time overseas. And then in college, I spent a quarter in Nicaragua, living with a family in Leon, Nicaragua. And that really changed my life. We worked in a environmental kind of oriented nursery, but it was really just about being there. We built schools on the weekend. It was a volunteer kind of program, but really, I came away with the treasure, of that experience more than I think anybody else. Then, as life is going, then I worked for Operation Smile after college. That's actually how I met Christy, which is another story. She was volunteering for Operation Smile, and I was working for them. It's a organization that does reconstructive surgery for kids around the world. And so I went to Russia 4 times, including Siberia twice, and the last time with Christy. And then anyway, many, many other places. And so that also changed my life, both being in those cultures and also seeing those families and the transformation they were going through. And the doctors and the nurses and the caregivers who both, yes, from the US, but also increasingly from other parts of the world joining in those medical missions as well. And so that was radically life altering. And then, so Christy and I kind of came into our relationship sharing that bug. And then that's just never left us. And we've been very, very fortunate, to be able to travel as often as we have, to live in France for that year. We were at the Olympics last summer in France again. Being able to expose our children to that, in different contexts around the world, to both engage in, just kind of good old fashioned tourism, but also go, like we went to the beaches at Normandy when we were in France this last summer for the first time, the graveyard, and just seeing Omaha Beach and all of that, and kind of really letting that perspective sink in. So there, again, it's a privilege to be able to do it, but it has definitely shaped my life, and I hope has benefited our children as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful to see that humans are humans, despite our influence of our upbringing or our geography. And I also think it's beautiful to recognize, like you talked about, that separateness that can, kind of lead us to feeling less than, and how beautiful to see how small the world really is when it comes to the human experience.
Yeah. I mean, one of the most magical experiences with Operation Smile is when you can take the child out of the recovery room and they've woken up from the surgery, and bring them back to their parent, usually their mother, and hand them back over, and see that the look on their face, and share it to some degree in that experience. And that's universal, right? A parent's love for their child and their hope for the health and well-being of their child. So yes, undoubtedly kind of the essence of what it means to be human, I think is true everywhere. And to have been able to witness that, intimately firsthand has really been special.
Well, and I thank you for the work you do in the world, because I think that coaching also is akin to that place of helping someone to see that hope and to experience that joy of coming into a place of greater well-being.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I mean, that is certainly my goal. And I think it's really been rewarding to see some of those coaching outcomes. Again, like I'm not trying to convert anybody to any kind of thing, or I'm not, many of them don't, it's not like all my clients take up meditation as a lifelong practice or anything like that. But when you coach someone to look at things in a different way, it is very gratifying, to when they get their eyes open and sort of see a new path forward that they weren't able to see before. I mean, it's so easy to get locked into our kind of habit patterns and to think that, a relationship or a project or whatever is just kind of intractable. But it's really, that is just in our mind, so if we can think about things and see things in a different way, then there's almost always a different path forward that's going to make us, find that satisfaction or happiness or whatever the outcome is that we're seeking in that case. So yes, agreed. And I'm, very happy to have moved into that, profession at this phase of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I know that we've had conversations about you coming back on the podcast as closer to the publication of your book, perhaps showing up in our Sober Edge book club to share the book with our readers. And so it's been so fun to connect with you in real life and to set some of my stories straight. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate it. The mythology. It's all good. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
The myth, the man, the legend. Now we got it, the truth.
Making it up. It's fine.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Billy.
Thank you, Terry. Take care.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.